Hello, world. My next guest believes that the stories we share have the power not only to strike a chord with audience around us, but also create connections that last. She is renowned for her super knowledge about how B2B brands can be creative on LinkedIn, and she's the creative lead of Creative Labs, owning narratives covering generative AI, branding, emotion in B2B, nostalgia in advertising, and visual trends. Please join me in welcoming Wensy Antoli, Creative Strategy Lead at LinkedIn, to the show. Wensy, are you ready to get radically transparent with me?
I am going to be so radically transparent with you, Jen.
That is exactly why we sought you out on this show. So let me kick off with, right, what is keeping you up at night professionally?
What's keeping me up at night professionally is how to incorporate cats and zombies into creative strategies. So they're my literally two favorite things in this world outside of my job, of course. And it's not entirely not relevant, right? Part of my job is to get marketers, B2B marketers in particular, to break away from being too corporate and safe with their approach to marketing on LinkedIn and thinking about how to get them to embrace creativity a bit more, and hopefully get to the point where they have this core belief about creativity and that it's what truly makes uh, advertising effective, right? And of course, part of that is being memorable. It's attention grabbing, and of course, what does that better than cats, zombies, and even maybe babies too?
Absolutely. Now, I'm glad you brought that up because in B2B marketing, which for us B2B marketers, there's always this running joke, right? How not to be boring, especially on LinkedIn, right? Don't want to be B2B boring. So it's interesting to me around the idea of maybe of this creative effectiveness, or how can B2B brands really be creative on LinkedIn? And why does it matter more today than it has maybe, a year ago, 5 years ago? And can you dive a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. Creative effectiveness for me simply is just how the creative drives desired marketing and business outcomes. And by creative, I mean the piece of advertisement, the piece of content in media, the campaign, and so on. And it's simply that it is about connecting the ad subject matter to business outcomes. And I think it matters more these days because honestly, it's a lot more competitive now. We're in, the attention economy, and the biggest risk for B2B marketing isn't being too creative, it's actually being forgettable.
Interesting. So that's very interesting, which leads me nicely into my next question for you, which is kind of focusing on this idea of embracing nostalgia, right? So if you go into your feed on LinkedIn, you see that really LinkedIn has been tapping a lot into nostalgic elements, I'll call them, and I'll let you explain a little bit more about what this means. But in your opinion, how can B2B brands be using nostalgia effectively to create more emotional and more authentic connections with their audiences and effectively be, more what we call, be more creatively effective?
Yeah, and I think that nostalgia is a really powerful way to be creatively effective, right? And there are three things at the top of my head that brands can do to be more creatively effective with nostalgia. And the first is that they can leverage their brand legacy, right? And those historic milestones within that brand story. Stories could be things that their audience already loves and about them. So this is something that's quite known about a brand if they're a famous brand, or maybe even things that are less obvious and a bit more hidden that make the audiences say, I never knew that about you, right? The second thing is that brands can tap into what I would call like pop culture touchstones and those memorable moments that the audience would have grown up with. And then think about how you can connect that in a creative way or a clever way back to what you do as a brand and to your category. The third is to draw inspiration from the visual aesthetics of a particular era, and that might be whether it's the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and noughties, which is now vintage, to create campaigns that feel familiar, right? That feel wholesome and comforting. And I know they sound like really strange words and descriptions of B2B advertising, but this stuff works, right? And it's then creating that association with your brand.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to talk about and it's important to bring to the forefront because as marketers, I think it's so easy sometimes to fall into the trap of, tactically coming in, doing day in and day out what works, right? And knowing what works and not necessarily always taking that step out of the creative bubble, to think a little broader, to think a little bigger, to think how can we be communicating this message, a bit more effectively, a bit more authentically. So I love, the idea of using the power of nostalgia marketing. Um, it also leads me to this idea of trust, right? Because when you bring nostalgic elements into your marketing and you're resonating with your audience's emotions, right? It is able to build a trust with your audience, right? And I think that the best
Mm.
creative strategies truly help the B2B brand build trust with their audience. Are there common pitfalls that you see sitting over at LinkedIn that maybe you could share with us that brands should avoid when dabbling in kind of being super creative or when it comes to, creating campaigns around nostalgia? What are some creative strategies that we should avoid?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think the key thing is to feel authentic, right? To come across authentic. And when brands are a bit too matter of fact and then they don't create that emotional connection with the audience, it's like, okay, great. Like it's great that you do that, but somehow it just doesn't make an impression, right? Like trust in B2B, it really comes down to authenticity, authentic storytelling, but also backing that up with real proof points. So it's great if you have the proof points, and it's great if you have a strong creative approach that's memorable, that's interesting. However, it's about combining those two things.
Hmm.
The other thing I would say in terms of what brands can do is leverage behavioral science or behavioral economics and those cognitive biases, right, in order to build trust. And that means, emphasizing social proof, for example, or leveraging social proof rather through customer case studies, testimonials, or working with subject matter experts and tapping into authority bias. And let real people tell your story, right? Customers, employees, leaders, um, and as well as the community at large. And think about how you can engage your community to share more user generated content.
I love that. I love that. And I think that, right, when it comes to authenticity, it's so important that brands aren't shy about going all in and that you come out the most authentic. Now, when I think about authentic storytelling, I have to ask you because I know you probably see this day in and day out. Maybe you can give us some tips or tricks, but what emotions do you think, or in your opinion, resonate best for B2B brands? What emotions should we all be aspiring to tap into?
This is so interesting and been very topical for us at Creative Labs. We've done a bit of research about emotion and in and around emotion as well, because we just think it's such a powerful it's a white space, right? So it's a powerful driver of action. And the trends and the insights that we're seeing, like they really speak to that in a way where it's so compelling, like brands need to get on this, right? What we've seen in one piece of research that we did was that brands that have the highest proportion of what I like to call visceral emotions on the platform. So, those emotion button, the reaction buttons that you have, where you see the applause, where you see the heart and the care and the funny or the humor reaction. Those top emotive brands, let's say, they actually have uh, higher performance or they drive performance metrics like click-through rate, engagement rate, and follower count as well on average compared to the rest of their industries. So we're really seeing this correlation between emotion and creative effectiveness or slash performance, right? Um, and just about what resonates the most, I would say it's actually the applause,
Oh, okay.
uh, because the most viral content on the platform, uh, even from brands, is actually human storytelling and that authentic storytelling. And I know people are probably sick of hearing the word authentic, like, oh God, this buzzword again. But it's true, cheesy or not, it's true, right? People relate to and celebrate other people's stories, right? And our job as marketers isn't to bombard audiences with, a list of features and benefits about what we're trying to sell. It's about, as you say, building that trust between our audience groups and members, which is really a diverse buying group, right? And so if you're not going to be authentic, then you're just another corporate voice that gets lost in the feed.
I couldn't agree with you more on that. And you mentioned, which I thought was very interesting, you talked about some research. And keep me honest, I've heard that LinkedIn may or may not be doing some new research, or maybe you recently released research around trust, authentic, authenticity, and emotion. And I was curious to know what surprised you most about the findings in that research.
Yeah, so we wanted to build on what we'd discovered already and help marketers better use emotion as a creative strategy. And a couple of things that were surprising was that, more and more brands are actually leveraging emotional content, and that on LinkedIn, we've seen this uptick in the usage of those emotional reactions. And this is on sponsored content, this is on advertising. So, not necessarily content from our members. And for me, this really reflects how the platform has evolved, right? There's a real blurring of the professional and personal, and that has been the case since COVID. Um, but it's just continued on that trajectory, right? And frankly, it speaks to what we know about a professional, an audience member, a buyer, an IT decision maker, is that, behind these job titles, they're just people, right? They're human beings. So that has been, it's great to see because it's like something that we feel and we observe, and it's qualitative, but it's great to have that quantitative data to back that up, right, and help encourage marketers to really adopt emotional creative strategies. Another thing that came out of this research was around humor. Okay, and humor, being funny. We know that it's kind of universal, right? And it's something that is also creatively effective. That's not going to be a surprise, I imagine, for B2C marketers, and hopefully not for B2B marketers as well. I think sometimes the reticence to be funny on LinkedIn is, well, how, and you don't want to get it wrong, and there's all these risks in the mind of a marketer, right? But frankly, it drives performance. So humor works. And if that wasn't like, that should be a great reason to experiment with humor. And you don't have to be really slapstick with it. You can, just be a bit witty or be, something like it's a little bit of a wink to what the audience is going through as a cohort. And I think now as well, right, in the world that we live in, AI in particular, it is becoming more and more an AI
Yeah.
driven or fueled world. And people are, you kind of have two camps where people are either very, very excited about all the possibilities for this technology. And then, I think there, as always, with any new innovation or technological advancement, there are people who are nervous about it and who likes that feeling of uncertainty, right? And so, those creative strategies that we mentioned, like nostalgia would be one, that makes them feel reassured. you know. It's like a bit of a hug from a brand, which I know sounds weird, but somehow it just on an unconscious level, it is kind of what people are looking for from like things that are external, whether that's advertising messages or whatever. I don't think people necessarily think about it too much. It's just a feeling.
I love that. I think that was put perfectly. And I think every brand wants to be able to give, their audience that much needed hug when needed. So I love the way you explained that. Thank you for that. So you spoke something interesting that, about audiences and, connecting to a cohort of people, right? At the end of the day, that's what marketing is connecting with people. But I'm curious because when we create campaigns, we want them to feel personal. We want them to be creative. But I think one of the biggest challenges, at least speaking from myself, right, is how do we get those campaigns to resonate across a wide range of industries and sector, right? So that you're creating this ad or this campaign that's going to be meaningful but scale. In your opinion, how do you think brands can create those those campaigns that are feeling personal and creative, but also still able to reach that wide range of industries in one go? Or is it not something that you recommend?
I think there's a way to do it. And I would actually recommend it, right? Like emotion, like humor, like nostalgia, those things are actually universal experiences. And if, let's say, you're targeting a particular segment, whether that's uh, software developers or food hall buyers, there's something about that uh, almost niche job, right? There's truths, there's shared experiences among that community that connects that audience. And in some ways, if we take a step back, there are also certain truths that connect professionals or people who work. And it's about tapping into that, right? And those experiences, like whatever it is that your audience does. And you can use emotion, so going back to emotion, as your bridge for that. So we mentioned humor, but really it's just about being relatable, okay? Being relatable on some level. And then you can kind of go deeper or broader depending on the audience you're wanting to target and whether the campaign is more of a general awareness campaign or a little bit further down the funnel. And I mean it works because it's fundamentally human, right? We feel before we think even. And when you move a bit more down the funnel, you're like, okay, but I still have something to sell. I'm not here just creating entertainment or
Yeah.
content for the sake of it. I mean, like it's relevant entertainment. Okay. It's great that our jobs are, quite fun and interesting. But it's really about leveraging creativity to tell a story that puts the customer at the heart of that story and you can educate and entertain in one, right? I mean, that's more likely to stick and land. Um, about your brand's offerings, right? And how it can help solve the problems that they, might face into in their day to day. And also like, sorry, I mean, as a professional and a personal,
Mm.
uh, as a person rather. Um, and doing it in a way that it just doesn't feel like an ad anymore. And I think in particular with LinkedIn, like it's a content feed, it's a social feed, it's a networking platform. So there's definitely a lot more creative flexibility than say necessarily other mediums.
Absolutely. And all right, so I've got to ask, we've been talking about nostalgia, emotions. I love it all. I want to think about what's next for B2B creativity. And if we were to look ahead, in your opinion, with all the research and all of the knowledge, and I know you've had some award-winning creative ideas, come into play, which is incredible. What creative trends do you see on the horizon for B2B marketing into 2025, especially for LinkedIn, that we should be preparing for to keep our feeds and our creatives fresh?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I will say that emotion and authenticity, there will be continuation of that, right?
Totally.
Like any good story, it will evolve, right? And then there'll be a new story arc for the same characters, if you will, same brands. And it will be even more crucial to tell authentic brand stories. And that's brand in parentheses because that's what it is really ultimately for, but maybe in not so much disguising, but just making it so much more meaningful to the audience in order to hold their attention. Okay, and I think, well, I'd mentioned earlier, attention is currency now, and it will just only ever get more and more competitive. And so we're going to see a lot more video content. And I think even recently, well, if you check your feeds, you would have seen a lot more video content being produced by influencers or connections that you follow, as well as brands, both in their organic as well as their paid strategies. So yeah, video would definitely dominate the attention economy, and to drive those greater engagement and longer dwell times essentially on your ad. So I think that for me is number one,
Mhm.
and not a new trend per se. I would also say, AI, right? It's kind of unavoidable. People feel all sorts of things about AI, but be that as it may, it's about and it's about focusing on what is the tangible value of AI. Like, how do you make it approachable? Okay. A lot of products and services and solutions will have AI infused into them. And so I think it's really important if we mention or talk about AI as a brand that we show how it solves real world problems and challenges that your audience actually faces. And of course, you can connect that back to emotion as a means to, and storytelling as a means to do that in video. So there you go. That's how to tick all
All
three,
in one. I mean, if you
three of
want the
those
whole,
boxes.
that was
This is
fantastic. It was
it.
like the whole episode wrapped. If you want to, that was
Right.
great.
And throw in
Fantastic.
nostalgia, you know, love it.
I
And
love
social proof. Let's
There
throw
you
in
go,
social proof
right
as well.
there. I
Done.
loved it. So listen, I have one last question for you. It may not be, you might have heard it before because I know that this was, I think when LinkedIn was founded, one of the questions that was circulating a lot within LinkedIn. But I'm so curious and I have to ask, what's one thing that you can tell us about yourself that we actually cannot learn about you from reading your LinkedIn profile?
Okay, so I knew this question was coming, and I feel a little embarrassed because I'm an open book, right? So everything on my LinkedIn, I'm like, wow, you actually may know quite a lot about me. I mean, if you really wanted to, um, on my LinkedIn. So I'm gonna just like come full circle here and just say, um, from this episode you will learn that I am obsessed with cats and zombies.
There you
And so
go.
that's not that. So there you go. And it's not apparent on my LinkedIn profile, but now I feel like this is a challenge. I'm going to set for myself, and I will need to. So that's going to be the Easter egg for anyone who listens to this episode. You can look out for any content that uses the life of a cat as a metaphor, right? For being a marketer, for example.
I love it. So, for everyone listening in, go ahead, follow Wensy on LinkedIn. Keep your eye out for cats and zombies. And if anybody would like to continue the conversation, Wensy, where is the best place to reach you?
On LinkedIn, please send me, slide into my DMs. And with any questions from this episode, or if you are indeed stalking my LinkedIn profile for anything, that I've talked about in the past, especially around how to leverage emotion, how to liberate your creativity in order to produce the best work that you have in your B2B advertising career. I want to be part of that journey. So please do reach out. And
I
thank you, Jen. It was really great being on this episode.
Absolutely. We loved having you. Everyone, take a moment, head over to LinkedIn, give Wensy a nice follow, go ahead and connect. And Wensley, we look forward to having you back for another round.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. Cheers.